In the IELTS speaking test, how would you answer the question, what games are popular in your country? To make sure you have plenty to say, today we'll cover a range of phrases you can use to build your own personal answer in the test. Hi, my name's Vic and this is episode 23 of the IELTS with Vic podcast. Before we get started with today's topic, I just want to mention the exciting new book that I've recently released. It's dedicated entirely to part 1 of the IELTS speaking test and is designed specifically to save you time during your test preparation process. If you want to find out more, check the link in the episode description. Right then, let's get started with today's topic. What games are popular in your country? Let's begin by thinking about the dictionary definition of the word game, and then think about some different types of game. According to the Cambridge Dictionary, a game is an entertaining activity or sport, especially one played by children, or the equipment needed for such an activity. As the definition states, sports can be classed as games. For example, team sports such as football and cricket class as games. Other sports with just 2 players can also class as games, such as singles tennis and badminton. So, in answering the question, what games are popular in your country, you could choose to mention sports. For example, I'm from England, so if I were answering this question, I would definitely have to mention football, cricket, and rugby as popular sporting games in my country. Whenever a question contains the phrase "in your country," I feel like a reasonable way to begin to answer is to confirm where you're from. So I would start by saying, I'm from England, and in my country. You don't have to start your answer this way, but to me it just seems like a sensible way to begin. An example answer for me then might start like this. Well, I'm from England, so as you can probably guess, football is one of the most popular games, followed closely by rugby. There are a bunch of other types of game that people in my country go and play at retail or leisure parks, such as bowling, mini golf, laser tag, darts, and axe throwing. I tried my first ever axe throwing a few months ago, and it really is a lot harder than it looks. Anyway, how about you? Where are you from, and which sports games are popular in your country? Let us know in the comments. Another common category of game involves games played with a board, such as chess or checkers. These games are known as board games, but remember that chess is also classified as an official sport. Chess seemed quite popular when I was at middle school, and then it went out of fashion a bit. However, I think it became more fashionable again since Netflix released the series The Queen's Gambit in 2020. How about in your country? Is it common for people to play chess? And would you describe it as one of the more popular games in your country? If yes, you might want to include it in your answer. There are many other types of board game available today. For example, in my country, board games like Monopoly and Cluedo are classics, and more recently the game Catan has become very popular. In my experience, it's quite common for families in my country to play these types of games together at Christmas. Is that something any of you have experienced? Or is there a different occasion that people commonly play games in your country? Also, when I was young, it was common for children in England to be allowed to take their favourite game into school on the last day of term, and all the kids would play games together during the afternoon. This isn't necessarily something I would mention in my answer to today's question though. It's just something that came to mind for me, so I thought I would share this little memory with you. On the topic of board games, Board game cafes have become quite popular in my country in recent years. These are venues where you can go and play with their games, usually for a fee per hour. There's normally a cafe or bar where you can order food and drinks, so board game cafes are quite popular with students. Are board game cafes common in your country? And are they popular enough to include in your answer? Remember, today I'm providing you with lots of possible ideas for details you could include, but you have to select just a few that feel most relevant to your answer. Another type of game popular in many countries is card games. That can include games such as poker, played with a traditional deck of cards, or it could be special decks of cards with images on, such as Uno or Top Trumps, for example. And while we're talking about card games, it's also worth mentioning collectible trading card games such as Pokemon and Magic the Gathering. If you're not familiar with this type of game, just do an online image search and you'll see some examples of the types of cards people collect. In some countries, this is a huge thing. How about in your country? Are card games popular? And if so, which types? Feel free to let us know in the comments. It would be nice to hear what's popular in different places. So far then, we've talked about sports, board games, card games, and collectible trading card games. But I think the topic of popular games would be incomplete without mentioning computer games. The topic of computer games is absolutely huge, but this is a part 1 question, so we'll just stick to some basic vocabulary. One way we can distinguish between types of digital game is the device they're played on. For example, PC games played on a computer, console games played on a gaming console, mobile games played on a phone or tablet, and arcade games played on an arcade machine. In my country, for example, I think there are a lot of gamers who are really into their PC or console games, but that actually there are probably more people who casually play mobile games on their phone, such as Candy Crush and Block Blast. How about in your country? Are digital games popular? And which types seem most popular to you? If relevant, you could include computer games in your answer. Now that we've considered various game types, you'll hopefully have plenty of ideas for how to answer the question, what games are popular in your country? However, if your answer feels quite short, you could expand it by saying something about games that are popular for different age groups. Obviously, you don't want to go on, as this is only a part 1 topic, but you could make a broad comparison between older and younger people, for example. It really depends on how in touch with this topic you personally are. For example, I might say, in my country, sports like football are really popular, but more and more people seem to be getting into board games too. Computer games are massively popular for my generation, particularly console games such as Skyrim. My parents' generation are more into games like pool and darts, and the younger generation seems to spend more time playing mobile games. This is just an example of how you could include different age groups into your answer. To summarise then, you could include a variety of different types of game in your answer, including sports games, board games, card games, and computer games. If your answer feels too short, you could choose to mention what is popular for different age groups. As always, try to create an answer that demonstrates enough language but stays on topic. Now that we're coming to the end of this episode, Take a few minutes to create your own answer to the question, what games are popular in your country? Go ahead and post a few sentences in the comments. And just a reminder, you can now buy my fantastic new IELTS Speaking Part 1 book via Amazon. The link is in the description. If you want to save time and study smart, go ahead and check it out. Thanks for joining me today, and don't forget, if you want a free copy of the podcast transcript, just head over to my IELTS blog and fill in the form. I just checked the poll, and the next most popular question is, are friends important to you? So I'll see you next episode for lots of useful phrases for talking about friendship and friends. Thanks for listening, and have a great day.